right, welcome to this talk of Agile Shift. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here in this community effort of bringing you some content. My name is Claudio La Sala. This talk is the Beyond the Daily Stand-Up, an Intro to Scrum. So you have up on the screen my contact information. If at any point in time afterwards you need to reach out to ask me, further questions or anything that might come to mind. I'm a technical director with Improving. I've been developing software for 25 plus years, been all over the map. And on my business card that you see on the screen, there are many things I'm very passionate about as far as technology is concerned, as well as there are other things that I'm also very passionate about. I always invite people, if you see anything there that you feel like chatting with me about, just drop me a note and, I'll make that happen. We can have a nice chat. So the agenda for this talk here is specifically as an intro to Scrum, right? So there's a lot of people who believe that they are doing Scrum, and many times what they are doing is what we call Scrum butt. It's like, well, we are doing sprint planning, but we are not doing retrospective. We are getting together every morning to do that daily stand-up thing, but we don't do planning, right? So this is what this talk has been created for. So essentially explain to people what are the main things around Scrum, why should you care about it? And essentially I'm gonna be also sharing my own experiences with it, because as I come to realize, a lot of the practices that we follow in Agile and Scrum, I started actually doing them before they had a name, as it were introduced by these frameworks and approaches. So I would like to share those experiences with you as well. So bottom line is, it's not something that I started practicing just a year or two ago. I've been doing this for quite some time now. So, and I'm big into sharing my experiences with people. So when I do this talk, I always ask people in the room, how's your daily stand-up? Which, if you go by the Scrum book, it's not called daily stand-up anymore. It's called just daily Scrum. So it's that point of the day when we get together, right, in a room, in some place, and we discuss things, right, pertaining to the project. And I get some interesting responses. Like I've had the situation where I've asked this question, and what I heard back was something like, well, yeah, we do this daily stand-up thing every other day. I'm like, okay, English is not my primary language, but I think daily means something else, right? And then as people explain how they are doing their daily Scrum, they say, yeah, people are usually sitting down, where it's like, by Scrum terms, it's not mandated that you need to stand up during that meeting. The idea behind standing up is just because it's supposed to be a quick meeting. It's a quick, touch base with your team members, and you keep on rolling. If you're sitting down, it's very easy to just let things, roll on for too long. You have people, holding a mug of coffee or whatever, their morning favorite drink is. But what really ticks a little nerve in me is people staring at their computers, right? So imagine this idea. So some people really like the idea of standing up during these meetings, and then you get into an environment where everybody's sitting down. They are supposed to be communicating, but they are all looking at their computers. I think it's defeating the purpose there. You don't quite get what this meeting is all about. And the other thing is, there's way more than 10 people in the room. I've been playing an Agile coach type of role in certain projects and in certain gigs. And as I play the role of a fly on the wall, just seeing how people are doing it, and then I see, oh yeah, just come to our daily stand-up. And then I see 20, 30 people in the room. I'm like, oh, okay, I see where we're going with this. We're going to be here for a while, right? And sure enough, it lasts for 45 minutes, where everybody's talking about everything except what they should be talking about. And we're going to be covering that throughout this presentation. So if any of those things you can relate to, it's like, well, yeah, that's how we've been doing Scrum. Well, it's not that you shouldn't have your little, coffee or tea or whatever it is that you drink in the morning, that's not the point. The point is, what are you doing with that time and the other people's time during that meeting, right? So when you think about projects for software, they're like the two extremes, right? And I'm pretty sure as you look at this picture, you can relate projects you've worked on where you can say, yep, I've worked on projects that clearly were on the left side of the slide here, where we've planned for the software for 4 years, we've built it for 6 years, and then we had it ready. And also, probably if you've worked on software projects where it's like every day you're putting out fire. You wake up in the morning, you get to the office, you start working, you have no idea what you're going to be working on because the requirements are changing under your feet. The thing that you talked about yesterday that you thought you were going to be working on today no longer holds true. So you're working on something completely different. And really, we should have, like, for software, unless you are in a situation where, yeah, my software actually backs up some crisis, so it's changing every day, it's very dynamic like that, or if it's something that has a magnitude where you do need to do a lot of planning beforehand, most software don't really follow or fall into those extremes. They fall in the middle. And if you say like, oh no, that never works for me, you know, I'm not a fireman, I'm not in crisis type of business, but still, I never know what I'm going to be working on a given day. Well, this is one of the things that Scrum should be helping us with, right? Because we shouldn't be in such a situation where we don't know what we are working on. So here's one slide that gives us all the elements around Scrum, right? So all of the main time-boxed activities that we follow, such as sprint planning, sprint review, retrospective, the daily Scrum, as well as some of the roles, and we're going to be talking about them, like product owner, Scrum Master, the development team, and the artifacts that we build and that we use throughout our Scrum project. So let's break it down and see what those pieces are. So before you kick into, say, Scrum mode, where the team is actually following the framework in order to do their work, before that, we need to, or I think I'm having connectivity issues here. Here we go. You should have already contracts in place. You should have the initial release plan established so that you know where you're going and what you need to have by the time you get there. And last but not least, you should have the team assembled, right? With all those parts in place, a product owner, which is one of the roles in Scrum, will establish the vision, right, for the business. So the product owner is the captain of the ship, is the person who knows where we are going, who can see the macro, right, see like through the horizon and say, that's where we are going, right, having that vision. And that person will also be prioritizing the product backlog. That is the person who will put together what are the goals, the activities that we need to implement in order to support the business. And that person will know which ones are the most important ones and which ones are kind of important, but not top priority. So they can stay at the bottom of that stack. Once the product backlog has been established and we can start working through our sprints, we do sprint planning, which is a time-boxed activity. The whole team is going to be there, and it can last anywhere between 2 hours to 8 hours, depending on how long your sprints are. So you may have a 1-week sprint, meaning you work for a whole week focused on those stories, on those tasks, on those features that you're building, right? And then another week, and then another week. Or you may have like a 2-week sprint where you work for 2 weeks focused on delivering those results, and then you review that, you start another 2 weeks. For some people, working with, or for some teams, some organizations, working with 1 week sprint is kind of like very quick. Things go by really fast. There are teams I've seen working with like 4 week sprints, which I personally think is too long, because it's too long of a cycle for you to be evaluating how you're doing and making corrections to, get back on track. So I've worked mostly with 2 week sprints, which for the projects that I've been involved with and the teams that I've been working with has been working out pretty well. So for a 2 week sprint, it's good to have a 4-hour long sprint planning session. Now that session is split into two sessions, and we're going to be talking about that later. But the idea is the team will be working with the product owner to grab those user stories at the top, from the top of the stack, the ones that have been already prioritized. Hopefully they've been broken down into smaller chunks, more manageable chunks, to be able to, for the team to work on those and actually deliver it within the length of that sprint. So it's very important at that point that those stories, we have the acceptance already defined. So we need to be able to know when the development team says we are done implementing these features, how are we going to verify that? How are we going to say, yes, I accept that feature? We need to essentially have like a little checklist that will tell you what you're going to be looking at to validate the effort. At that meeting, the team will forecast what features they're going to be working on, what user stories they're going to be working on, and then the team will create the tasks necessary to implement those features. And we're going to revisit those concepts in a little bit. All right, so this is a visual representation of the team picking a feature from the backlog and saying, in order to implement this feature, we are going to need to accomplish the following tasks, which could be something like, well, we need to create this table on the database. We need to pre-populate with some seed data. We need to create the UI for it. We need to create some business logic, whatever the tasks are, right? And that's going to be part of what we call the sprint backlog. So the things that have to be done within that sprint, within that period. So we do that work. At the end of each sprint, we should have, quote unquote, potentially releasable software, which means that we could get, or not necessarily potentially releasable software, potentially releasable products, right? Whatever that means for the product that you're creating. So if it's a startup, for instance, you want to have most likely some feature that can be rolled out to public consumption so that people can start hammering at it. Depending on another kind of product, maybe the thing that you're going to be releasing is some documentation for users, or some sales material that are part of the product, some training material, whatever it is for that product that the team is building upon. As we are working during a sprint, we do what is called daily scrum, right? Which is a short meeting, usually at the beginning of the day. It shouldn't last more than 15 minutes, where it's essentially the place where people will get together, right? The people in the team will get together to check status on things, in the sense of not like reporting status, but it's more like, how are we doing as a team? What did we do yesterday? What are we doing today? Is there anything that's preventing us from being successful today? And we work through that. And we're going to revisit all of these in further slides. Moving on to the, another thing we do at the daily scrum, which is common practice, is to update a burn down chart, which is going to tell us, it's a visual clue as to how we are doing during that sprint. Are we making progress, or are we staying stagnant, or are we actually getting more work than what we predicted at the beginning of the sprint? So it's this daily checkpoint for the team. There we go. Scrum was not designed to solve your problems, it was designed to expose them. I like this approach, and I do have to draw a parallel with one of my passions, which is to go really fast with a motorcycle at a racetrack, right? So when you're going really fast on any kind of vehicle, right, even if you're driving down the highway, for instance, if you're going really fast and you're looking at your speedometer, you're not seeing what's coming at you. If you're looking down and seeing, well, you know, the road is coming back really, really fast. By the time you look up, you may be missing like your braking zone to be able to safely make a turn, right? Take a corner. As we're building software or building any kind of product, this analogy also applies where you should be able to see what's coming your way, because if you're heads down working on, you know, writing some code, building some software for 6 months, and you don't look up to see what the market is around you, what your business is actually around you, you may be missing the mark and you don't realize until you actually look up by the time when you're just about to hit something or run off track, right? Ask me how I know that. So Scrum gives us this way to actually work very focused on the tasks and the features that we have at hand, aiming at a goal, a business goal, right? And should anything be coming our way to move us off track, we should see that as quickly as possible so that we can actually take action. We give the brain and people time to react to it and plan for it, right? So parts of Scrum are roles, rules, very few rules, and practices that we follow. So let's break those down as well. By the way, there is a Q&A button on the Teams interface there that you can hit to post your questions. I will be, actually, we're going to be pulling up those questions, and I'll take them towards the end of the talk, but make sure to be posting those talks as those questions as you think of them, and we're going to be tackling those towards the end of the talk. Scrum roles, 3 and only 3 roles. Product owner, which we have talked a little bit about it, and we're going to revisit. Scrum Master and the development team. The slide here shows a little representation of what that arrangement looks like, where you have the stakeholders and the sponsor, and then you have the product owner and the Scrum Master, sort of like working as a mediator between the team and the business people. And then you have the Scrum team. Now notice that one common mistake that I see people making is by saying, oh yeah, the product owner and the Scrum Master, they are there to shield the development team from the business folks. That's a mistake, right? That's why on this slide, there is a little, you know, a member of the development team should be able to go and talk to a stakeholder, to a sponsor, you know, maybe to further clarify certain things, like, oh yeah, we are building this feature. Tell me again, for you, what is that? Why is that feature important to you, right? You should have this open communication, okay? And see product owner and Scrum Masters being there as facilitators, right, to help you on a daily basis, but nothing should prevent you from, you know, going and talking to the business folks. And also to, if you're a developer, to stay away from the whole, oh yeah, writing JavaScript, writing Java, writing you know. All right, so going back to the product owner role is a very important one. It should be one person, one single person representing the stakeholders and or the customers. I've seen places where they have, it's like, oh no, we have multiple product owners for the product. That doesn't quite really work. I mean, I haven't seen that really working in the wild, because you need to have one person who has this coherent, consolidated idea as to where we are going, right? It just helps moving things along. That person has a final authority, right, in prioritizing and creating the backlog. And very important, the product owner must be available to the development team at any time. I've seen a common problem that happens at many places is the product owner is there for sprint planning or at the very beginning when they're discussing some of the features that have to be built. And then they're off doing, like busy work. They're stuck in meetings. They're doing other things. And the development team does not have anybody to actually go ask questions to. And that's very problematic, right? Because that way, if the development team does not have a person who knows the direction we are going to ask questions, the team may start just working, making things up, right? Making up acceptance criteria, making up requirements, making up UX decisions, and that's not a good thing because that's going to cause rework, right? Because by the time they show that to the product owner will likely say, well, that's not exactly what we need. Go back and start over. That's not good. On the other hand, even though we say, yes, the product owner should be available to the team at any time, it does not mean that the product owner should be looking over the team's shoulder asking, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? That's not the idea. The idea is being available to support the team as the team needs that person. Very important distinction. Same thing with the Scrum Master, right? So the Scrum Master should be a facilitator, right, for the team and for the product owner. The Scrum Master should be the person helping clearing any roadblocks to the team. Maybe a member of the team, a new member of the team does not have whatever license they need to the tools that the team's going to be using to produce the work. Well, the Scrum Master should take note of that and should act on it, right? If the team needs clarification of certain acceptance criteria on a story, the Scrum Master should, take note of that and go talk to the PO, the product owner, clear up those roadblocks. It should also be the person who makes sure that, all of these time box activities, we are actually conforming with the time box. So if we have 2 hours for sprint planning, 2 hours it is. If we have 15 minutes for daily Scrum, 15 minutes it is. If it's running longer or too short, the Scrum Master should, realize that and adjust accordingly, right? Again, much like I've mentioned to a product owner, where a product owner is not the person who's going to be asking the team, are we done yet? Are we done yet? A Scrum Master is also not a project manager, right? The Scrum Master is not going to be walking up to the team saying, are we done yet? Are we done yet? That's not the idea, right? It's more of a servant to the team, a person who's going to be there, and the team member will say, hey man, I need a license for this, or I need better acceptance criteria here, or I need some explanation. I'm not actually getting my mind around acceptance criteria here. That's what the role of that person is all about, right? To support the Agile principle for the environment and building this environment to make sure that, look, we are a team, we are working on the same product, we are trying to produce the same product, whatever, let's do whatever it takes to make it come true. The development team. So a very common misunderstanding when we say, well, the development team Scrum, we are already thinking developers, right? So in the sense of coders, programmers. A developer in a Scrum team is essentially anybody contributing to, well, developing the product. That means writing code. That means architecting the solution. That means testing the solution. Whether you're testing, doing manual testing, running the app and clicking around, or whether you're automating the test, like writing code that runs automated tests, or even if you're a UX designer, a user experience designer, you're also looking at user stories and figuring out a way to develop a better interface between the end users and your software. So those are all part of the development team. And many times, these team members, they're going to be cross-functional. And we usually use like a band analogy to describe this. Like, for example, you saw in one of my photos, I play the guitar, I play some other instruments. So when I'm in a band situation, if I'm only the guitarist and that's the only thing I can do, it does not help me really to make my band work better. It does help me if I also play the drums, which is the case, because at that point, when I'm working with a group, with a band, I can talk to the drummer and at least have some notion of what kind of work he does, and I can offer suggestion, I can offer help, I can unblock him if he's having like a creative block or of some sort. Same thing in a development team, a software development team. If as a coder, I can help my QA guy automate their tests, that's great. If the QA guy can help me write better unit tests, oh, how so? Yes, if we are speaking English, the QA guy can help me producing great acceptance criteria or test cases out of the user stories that we're working on, and out of that I can create better unit tests from my coder side, so we can all collaborate. Even like I've done this a lot, where as a programmer, a coder, I help the UX person to create better UX, because sometimes I do get some UX requests where the things that I see on the UX, it's too technical. For example, a delete button, a load button. Those are technical terms, right? End users don't think that way. We have taught them to think in terms of deleting things, but that's wrong, right? And I have a whole other talk about that, and you can look it up on my blog as well, my talks about this. But the point being that a coder should be able to talk to a UX person and vice versa as they are talking about the product that they are building. So this is a very important aspect of a development team. So don't think that, oh yeah, I'm just the guy who writes code here, in my little cubicle, and all I know is JavaScript. No, you have to step out of that and participate with the whole team. And by the way, the teams, an ideal Scrum team should go from like 3 to 9 members. Anything above that, too big, it's too hard to manage. At that point, you should probably look into splitting into smaller teams, makes it more effective. Some of the Scrum artifacts that we use are the product backlog and the sprint backlog, which I had mentioned before. Product backlog, that's where we have the main activities, the main goals that we want to accomplish with the product that we are building. Even though Scrum does not dictate, well, you should use user stories for that, that's very common. That's what you're going to find the most. So those features are described in terms of user stories, and that's part of the left side of the equation here on this photo. And then on the right, you have the sprint backlog. You have the tasks that you need to accomplish in order to realize those features, those user stories. Sprint planning. That's the time I said at the beginning of the sprint, the team gets together. In a 2-week sprint, we normally spend about 4 hours in planning. That's a long time. Yes, I know, but let me explain how that works. We split that up into 2 sections of 2 hours. The first half, the first 2 hours, we have the product owner and the team working together, where the team is gonna forecast a set of features that they can essentially implement during that sprint, that they believe. So it's a forecast. Remember, it could rain. There is a 60% chance that it's going to rain. Maybe it's not going to rain at all. Maybe it's going to rain just a little bit here, but not here, right? It's a forecast. So the team will say, well, based on what we feel like if we're at the beginning of the project, it's very hard to gauge, right? But the team would start, well, let's start with those 4 stories and see how far we get with that. At that moment, the team will also take the time to ask the product owner for clarification on the requirements of that user story. Any acceptance criteria that's unclear, that's the time to ask. The team should not move forward working on a specific user story if they are not clear on what is it that they are building. So if there's any question, if the team is not comfortable with the acceptance criteria, raise your hand and saying, say it's not clear to me. I am not sure where we are going with that. Once those stories have been picked, have been forecasted by the team, we go for the second part, the second half of sprint planning. So in the first half, we pick what we are going to be working on. The second part, the second half, we define how are we going to be implementing that what part. And that is just for the team. The product owner does not partake on that part because the product owner is not there to say, oh, team, you need to create a database, you need to create a table, you need to create a business logic, business object or whatever it is. That's not up to the product owner to decide, right? The product owner trusts the team will take care of that. So the team has the user stories. The team will split each user story into tasks that can be accomplished, that have to be accomplished within that sprint. And it could be design oriented. Like with most of the teams I work with, one of the first tasks that we have is a design session. And then we write down who are the team members who should be in that design session. Sometimes it's the whole team if it's a feature that's going to impact everybody, right? And then the team gets together, runs, time box it, say half hour, 1 hour, whatever it takes for the team or the members to discuss the design for the feature. And many times out of that session, we create more tasks, right? Because it's going to unveil certain things that maybe we were not thinking when we were sitting there just talking about the story itself. Once we have those things in place, again, we have as part of the artifacts for Scrum, we have the burn ups and the burn downs. The burn up charts, we create those and we feed those with the number of points, if that's how we are sizing the stories, right? And we didn't get to talk about story points yet, but just think of a value that we assign to each story to determine the size of that story, right? So say that our backlog is worth 200 points. We keep track at the end of each sprint. We update that burn up chart to see how we are progressing towards that release that we've agreed on or that we are shooting for, right? That we are trying to achieve. The burn down is the one that we are going to be updating every morning to essentially say, well, at the beginning of the sprint, we said we had this number of hours or this number of tasks to be, working on every day, every morning. We update the burn down to say, well, we said we were going to be working like on this task for 10 hours. I've worked already 8 hours and I have 2 hours left. We update that on the chart and we want to see that going down. It doesn't mean that, well, yeah, you said you were going to be working on this 10 hours. You've worked 8. Now you only have 2. You can only work on it 2. No, it's not like that. As it happens, sometimes you say, it will take me 10 hours and then you spend 2 hours working on it. And then it reveals things that you didn't know before. And you're going to have to go back to the team and say, I thought it was going to take me 10 hours. I've already spent 2. It will take me an extra 4 hours besides those 10 to actually implement that because of this, that, or the other. And that should be fine, right? Team members should be comfortable with this kind of thing because it builds as part of the story of the team where on the next sprint, if we have a similar task and we go like, oh yeah, last time we said it was going to take 10, it actually took us 14. Why was it? Oh, because that thing that was missing. Does it still hold true if we do that similar task on this sprint? One may say, no, now it's going to actually take us just 6 because we've built some framework parts that we can reuse. Or no, it's actually, no, it's still those 14 hours and maybe even a little more because in this case, it's a little more complicated. It opens up for the whole, know what's coming at you, right? There's no judgment on, oh yeah, this is actually going to take longer than what we thought it would. Having a Scrum board really, really helps. It's very recommended, where you can put down for each sprint, what are the stories that we've picked during sprint planning, what are the tasks that we have to do, and then move the cards to indicate which tasks are in process and which tasks are done. It's a visual way to see how we are doing within that sprint. Some people say, oh yeah, so should I use team system? Should I use Jira? Should I use, or Jira, however it's pronounced? Should I use Pivotal Tracker? Should I use, usually my recommendation is just get some cardboard or some whiteboard, draw something like what you're seeing on the picture here, get some sticky notes, start with that, right? Because it's more about the process than the tool. Find the process as it works for you, because maybe you're going to need a couple more columns on that board, because some people work with oh yeah, we need to have like a block column to indicate what task is blocked. Others like to put it at the bottom. Others like to have, okay, this is in QA or it's ready for QA, right? All this needs to be, it's ready to be demoed to the product owner. So figure out your process first, and moving, sticky notes on a board is way easier than working with a lot of systems, right? Because a lot of systems are big, very flexible. They do a million things. Start with the basic, right? Get that part knocked down. Make sure that you find a process and a flow that works well with the team. Once you got that in place, all right, given the way that the team decided that this is how they perform better, and given the results presented this far, let's look at what software we can actually use to automate some of that. That's totally fine, right? Daily stand-up. So how do we do that? So the daily Scrum, right, should I say, some people recommend, stand up to make sure that the meeting is shorter. I personally, I'm a very active person. I like stand-up form. I just get the blood pumping, get all energetic in the morning, but it really doesn't matter. If people want to sit down because that's how they feel more comfortable, that's great, as long as we are keeping the meeting straight to the point. The typical ways to go about it is you ask the team, what did you accomplish yesterday? What do you plan to accomplish today? What is keeping you from being successful today? Those are the three main things. Now, let me share with you one situation where when I saw this team for the first time for a daily Scrum, I thought, well, this is not going to work. But let me tell you, I'm sitting there, or actually, I was standing. I was the first one to get to the room. I was standing there. I see the team members coming in. They're all carrying their computers. They're all carrying a mug of something. They all sit down. They all open their computers. At that point, I'm like, okay, this is awkward. Let me sit down. But I'm already thinking, I'm going to be here for a while. That I was mistaken. That Scrum Master actually had it down. It was a 6-person team. Yes, they all had their computers. They were all sitting down. But the way that the Scrum Master started the meeting was by flipping these questions. She started the meeting by asking, does anybody have any roadblock? Because if the team has a roadblock, that should be the top priority, right? If the team has a roadblock, what they did yesterday, it doesn't matter. What they are planning on doing today, it doesn't matter if they're blocked, right? So let's first talk about that. Should anybody raise a hand and say, oh yes, I have a roadblock and this is it? The Scrum Master would take note of that and say, okay, do we need a meeting for that? Yes, I will set that up. Who needs to be in that meeting? Person X, Y, and Z. Okay, good, let's proceed. Excellent. So you get the roadblock out of the way. Sometimes it doesn't call for a meeting. It's just like, oh yeah, I have the answer to you. I'll come see you after the meeting, right? Once you got that out of the way, then they would proceed with, what did I do yesterday? What do I plan on doing today? And the reason why they had their computers was that should any question come up during the Scrum, they could quickly, and I saw them do that, they would quickly do some quick research, respond it, and that was it. Within 15 minutes, we were out of the room. For the, I think I was out there for like 2 or 3 months. I didn't see the meeting running over 15 minutes ever. I'm like, this is brilliant. I'm so borrowing that. This idea of start with the roadblocks. If you have a roadblock, get it out of the way as quickly as you can, and then move on with the rest stuff, right? So this is really good stuff. Sprint review is what we do at the end of the sprint, and we get the team together, we get the product owner, and we get to meet the stakeholders, and we demo to them the increments that we've been working on during the current sprint that is just ending, right? We describe the features that have been completed, the exceptions to success criteria are called out, right? The stakeholders have a chance to provide some feedback on the product based on what they are seeing. If necessary, some changes are made to the product backlog at that point. That's a good time to touch base and see, are we on the right track? Do we need to make corrections? This is the time to raise those things. And a release plan is reviewed if it's appropriate at that time. There might be a demo. I've seen people where cases where they spend a lot of time demoing things, like clicking around. It's like, oh yeah, we've added this button, and you can go to this screen, and then you can put in all of this data, and then you can hit the button, and then you wait, because sometimes it's going out to an external resource and then waiting on a response. And then on the way back, oh, and here it's a little message that shows. I don't think that's the most effective way to do a sprint review, because that takes up time, and people are not there to see what buttons you've added to the screen. They are there to see, the features that got completed, why we've worked on those features, why is that important to the business as a whole? What is the business value that we've built from these features? So at times, whatever feature I'm working on, if it takes time to demo it like that, clicking around, what I do is I create some snapshots, I pre-record a video, and then I create a storyline to tell that story to the people in attendance to that sprint review, which makes it way more effective to demonstrate what we've built, gather feedback from the people who we are building the thing for, and get things moving in a more effective way, right? So just something to keep in mind. But it's very important that we do that we get to do this review, because, I mean, we've been working really hard on this for 1 week, 2 weeks, however long your sprints are. Let's make sure that we stop. It's the whole thing that I said, instead of working like this for months, no, you work like this for a day, right? Because next morning you're gonna go like this and check with the team how everybody's doing. And then you do a little more of that, and you repeat that during your sprints. At the end of the sprint, you actually stand up, right? You stretch, and then you have a bigger conversation. You're looking more of the bigger picture, right? That's a big thing as to why we do Scrum. Definition of done. As part of the work that we do, it's very important to have a document, or even just like something printed, hang up on the wall, or something that you write to the whiteboard, something that defines, what is our definition of done? How do we know if we are done along the way here? So for each one of those steps, we may have a different definition of done. So for the task at hand, the one task that we need as part of a user story, how do we know that we are done with that task? It's up to the team to define. Sometimes the organization will also help the team define some things. So for example, are the unit tests written for the feature that you're building? Has the code being reviewed? Is it checked into source control? So you need to have a list to check, like, yep, I'm done with that task. Moving on to the next. The feature, the user story, how do I know that it's done? Maybe has been acceptance tested on the test server or on some staging server. What is the policy, right? What is the expectation there? Have we tested performance? Where do we test performance to make sure that it's acceptable? Has documentation been written? Has training been created? Whatever it is, the done within that product that's being built, that has to be clearly defined, so that the team is not like asking, well, what should I do now? Well, you have a checklist to go by, right? When do we know if we are done with the sprint? Has the code, the things that we created been versioned? Is it in user acceptance testing? Has it been integrated with other parts of the overall product, right? So identify that, make sure that you have definition of done for those parts of your project and product to make sure that you are hitting the mark. Are we done with the release, right? What about compliance? Has it been labeled in source control? Maybe this is where you do the training, right, before actually releasing. Every product varies, so you have to identify those checkpoints. Those are checkpoints, and you have checklists for each checkpoint. Sprint retrospective. So after sprint review, at the end of the sprint, we have to look back and reflect upon the work that has been done and look for areas where we can improve, right? So for categories, people doing, right? Do they need to acquire more skills? Do they need to acquire more knowledge of the industry that we're working on, right? Do they need maybe some help with some personal things? Maybe some team member is going through something and need some help. You know, let's make sure that we are working with everybody. Relationships. How are the team members relating to each other? Are they collaborating in a healthy way? Are things moving along nicely? The process, the way we are doing things. We have sprint planning on Mondays, right? Is that working? Some people prefer to have sprint planning on Wednesday. It's up to the team. The team decides. What about the environment? Do we have an environment that fosters, the ability of the team to collaborate, to produce, to work effectively? Immediately adopt improvements for the next iteration. So in a sprint retrospective, you spend the time, it's time boxed. In a 2-week sprint, it usually takes 2 hours, right? 1 to 2 hours. And then you time box it. You take notes. So the Scrum Master will take notes of the issues or the things brought up by the team. And then if the team decide, you know what, we have been using this tool as our Scrum board, but it hasn't been working. It's preventing the team from being more productive for whatever reason. Okay, the team decides we want to try something else. Okay, what do we want to try? Maybe we want to try another tool, or maybe we want to try just a regular physical board. Okay, let's try that. Make that an actionable item. Track it during the sprints to make sure that you are actually doing what the team said that you're going to be doing. And the Scrum Master is the one that's going to take ownership of that and make sure that the thing is going to actually happen. And then next retro, a common practice that I always follow is when we start the retro, let's start by looking at the actionable items from the previous retro and say, well, we said we're going to be trying out a physical Scrum board. Have we done that? Yes. How did it go? Has it made our process better or worse? Do we want to try something different? Evaluate that first, and then proceed with evaluation of the sprint that's just ending. If you look up sprint retrospective techniques, there are many techniques to foster the communication and establishing an environment of trust where people can feel safe to share and express their ideas, their feelings, their thoughts about the way the team is working. So it's a very, very important meeting in a Scrum team. I will jump through some of these slides to give you folks more time to ask questions. Remember, there is a Q&A button there. Hit that button. Post your questions. I'll be opening for questions like in about 2 or 3 to give me time to go through them. How to estimate user stories. People use all sorts of different things. Sometimes at the beginning of a project, just as we are building a product backlog, a lot of people like using like t-shirt sizes, like extra small, small, medium, large, just to have a ballpark as to how big this thing is. And then for actually starting the Scrum work and creating the sprints and all, we end up using story points, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Some people use like a variation of the Fibonacci scale, where you have 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so on. Whatever you use, just try to use it consistently, make sure that it works well for the team, right? The two charts that we use that I've mentioned before. Velocity is essentially once you've established how you're going to be sizing your stories, for example, using story points, at the end of the sprint, you're going to add up how many points to be able to gauge the team's velocity. Oh, on average, the team can perform 40 story points per sprint. So when you're planning for the next sprint, you can sort of like know how many you can actually for that sprint. User story can have a whole talk about user stories. If you go actually on my blog, recently I've been posting a lot about user stories. Check it out there. If you're doing a 2-week sprint with some of the ceremonies, this is a common way, right? Where Monday through Friday, you do sprint planning on first Monday, on the first sprint, on the throughout the days, at the end of the sprint, on the second, you do followed by sprint again. Some teams will adjust that according to what worked better for them. Some teams will do product backlog grooming or refinements in between sprints to just look ahead, see what's coming up next sprint, and trying to fine-tune the acceptance criteria, the user stories that we have. And you may do some like little design upfront before you start working on your tasks. As far as acceptance criteria, I'm a big proponent of given when then, which is a Gherkin language for this type of criteria. Again, you can look up on my blog. I've been writing about that quite a bit if you're not familiar with that way of doing acceptance criteria. And now is the time to open up for questions. So John, what have we got?
Hey, Claudio, we got some great questions.
All right.
First one I want to start here is, how does this translate to the current world of remote? Stand-up to take a lot longer on a video call.
Okay, that's a great question. Thanks, whoever posted that one. Yes, we are all facing that, right? So with all the teams that I've been working on remotely, and I've worked remotely way before, pandemics and things like that, you just have to make sure that the Scrum Master is playing the role of keeping things at 15 minutes, right? Or some teams even take less than that. If it's taking longer, it's because of, people are just maybe rumbling too long or the team is too big. But aside from communication issues, connectivity issues, you should still be able to proceed with the meeting the same way we do in person. I definitely recommend you use your camera. Don't have, only phone calls or like Skype calls or what have you without using the camera. You want to get as close to the in presence as you can so that you are seeing people and you can see body language from people, because if we are all just using like our phones or if we're not seeing each other, it's very easy to step on each other's toes. If you're seeing people, you can see the body language and like if Claudio goes like this, he's about to talk because he uses his hands a lot, right? So you learn the timing of your team. The people who are, like introverts and they're just waiting on everybody to talk before they talk. So you need to use these tools to see the human side of things, learn the timing of the different people on your team, and take it from there.
Thanks, Claudio. Next question, how does a BA business analyst fit into the Scrum team?
Oh, I love that question, right? So how does the BA fit into it? Oh, I love BAs and I love when I can collaborate with them. So the teams have to work with user stories with acceptance criteria. Who's writing those? It's either a product owner or a business analyst. So a business analyst, as far as I'm concerned, is part of the team, right? It's also working on building the assets, right? The artifacts that we use to produce that solution. So the business analyst should be the person who can translate the vision of the business of the product owner into some sort of written form, but not like hard requirements as in waterfall, but the plain English that will spark the communication with the team, right? So I think the business analyst is a very essential role as long as that person is not dictating to the team, hey, these are the requirements, this is what we are requiring you to do, right? And it's more like, no, I'm providing you with user stories to spark conversation so that you can see where we are going, ask all the questions. It's not written in stone. We can change this and accommodate the language to make sure that everybody on the team knows what we are talking about here, what we're building, and most importantly, why we are building this. This is like, I cannot walk up to a business analyst and ask, hey, why are we working on this story? Why is this valuable to the business? And the person say, well, I don't know. Well, it's a business analyst. That person should have that answer. And the development team should ask those questions. They should know why we are spending time and effort working on something. Why and how are we helping the business by implementing that? So business analysts, again, I have a couple of blog posts that I've put about exactly this kind of situation. How do we get QA, like traditional QA folks and business analysts integrated with the team to be more collaborative and more productive?
Okay, the next question is about project managers. Is there a need for a project manager in Agile? And if not, who manages the financials for the project?
So the financials definitely should not be part of what the Scrum team is all about. Like, so a project manager, I would see a project manager standing like outside of that realm, in the sense that at the beginning of the project, yes, we have the project, probably some sort of product manager, I guess not necessarily a project manager. So a product manager who knows about the contract, who knows about the negotiation with stakeholders, who knows about the finances around the project, and that person will be touching base most likely with the product owner, right, to essentially know, how are we managing our resources? Are we going to need to hire more people? Are we going to need to buy new gear and things like that? But that person would stay outside of the realm of the people building the solution. At least that's I'm pretty sure different Agilists or different Agile coaches will approach it a different way. But this is how I've seen. The teams I've worked with, we have not found any benefit in having a project manager breathing down our neck saying, are we done yet? Are we done yet? Are we done yet? That does not help, right? So one of the things from Scrum is to give the team autonomy to say, okay, give us the things that are important. We'll figure out the best way to accomplish these goals from the business, and let us do our work, for the whole sprint. And then at the end of the sprint, we're going to report back and say, this is the value that we've built based on what we've talked about. And then from that point on, the product owner reports, I guess, to managers to say, well, this is what we are producing. Let's look at the finances, see if we are really building some value, whether it's relevant for the things that we're building, and taking it from there.
Okay, the next question is what I can identify with. So what if you're on a very small team where maybe you only have one or two people on the team? How do you manage the different roles?
That's a very cool question, because I've been in situations where I've played pretty much all the roles in a Scrum team. I've played the product owner role. I've played the software developer, UX designer, the tester, the Scrum master. I think it's important for any person who works in a Scrum team to get familiar with all those roles, be a little cross-functional. And I personally follow Scrum practices, even doing my own thing, my own personal little, like personal projects, even like my music projects. I create a backlog. I plan out what I'm going to be working on. At the end, I review it, right? I think I do a retrospective, think, okay, how can I make it better? Even though I'm the only one working on the thing. because if I have good control over that, a good hang on how those things work, it just makes my life a lot easier. Because even though I'm like a developer by heart, I've been coaching product owner, business analysts, scrum masters to do that kind of work. Why? Because I've done that myself, and out of need at times, but also so that when I communicate with them, I know better how to communicate with a product owner, how to communicate with a business analyst, right? To facilitate that communication, and because we are all aiming towards the same goal, right? I hope that helps. And I think we are right out at the time. Do we have still a lot more questions left, or how are we doing?
We have a few more questions. Would you like me to send these to you so you could answer them later, or would you want to take some now?
Yeah, so let's do this. I want to respect people's time. So the questions that didn't get answered, John will forward it to me. I will compile them and then write a blog post. It's going to be unidentified. Okay, so whatever questions you had, I'm going to respond in the shape of a blog. So you have my blog up there on the screen, lasala.net. It will be up either tomorrow or the day after with the questions. Thank you all very much for attending this session, sticking around with us. And, I hope to be hearing from you guys soon. Have fun.